Hello everyone, my name is Akam Rahman and I'm the Program Operations Branch Chief in the Division of Energy Assistance with the Office of Community Services in the Administration for Children and Families. On behalf of the division, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Completing the Federal Fiscal Year 2025 LIHEAP Quarterly Report. Next slide, please. Today's webinar will provide an overview and reminders for completing the LIHEAP Quarterly Performance and Management Report, otherwise known as the LIHEAP Quarterly Report. The purposes of today's webinar are to review the key requirements for completing the LIHEAP Quarterly Report for the current fiscal year 2025, to review the data you need to prepare for the report, and to review the process for submitting the report. Our office has recently published an action transmittal announcing the due date and the instructions. The audience for today's webinar includes all LIHEAP grant recipients, including states, territories, and tribes. This webinar is intended for LIHEAP program managers and their staff or contractors who help complete the LIHEAP Quarterly Report. If you have staff unable to attend, or if you want to hear the training again, a recording will be made available on the ACF YouTube channel. Today's webinar is being conducted by Apprise, and we have two presenters from Apprise team. Melissa Torgerson of Verb Associates is a former LIHEAP coordinator for Oregon, and she works regularly to assist grant recipients and in-depth technical assistance. Dan Bausch of Apprise has more than 10 years of experience conducting LIHEAP report training and review. We greatly appreciate you joining us today and hope today's webinar is valuable. Have a wonderful holiday season. Melissa, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Akam, and thank you all for joining us today. We're happy to have you. Today's webinar is going to be 60 minutes long, and right now, if you want to go take a look at the slides or other resources that we'll reference during this webinar, you can go to the handout section of the GoToWebinar sidebar. Just so all of you know, as Akam said, this webinar is being recorded and it'll be published on the ACF YouTube channel. So if you want to go back and hear pieces of it again, or you want other members of your staff to listen, it will be available and recorded. Next slide. We encourage you to ask questions as we go through the webinar, and you can do this by typing into the GoToWebinar question box. This is going to be in the sidebar that we just referenced, kind of the same place where your handouts are going to be. If you can't see that sidebar, look for that orange arrow. In some screens, I think it's green, but if you click that, it should expand the sidebar so that you can see those handouts and you can see the question box. And we encourage you to type your question in, and we'll review your questions throughout the webinar, and at the end, we'll answer them. And if we don't have time, we'll email you with a response. Now, as we normally do, this is a presentation outline, and what you see is that today we're going to talk about what's new for reporting and give you a general overview. We're going to go over at a high level the data needed to complete the report, and then we're going to go through section by section and share some kind of in-depth tips and common issues. And then we're going to give some final reminders at the end. And we include this because we know some of you will go back and want to refresh on certain areas or ask certain questions. And this is kind of a nice table of contents or index to the presentation. Now, as usual, we're going to start with a poll. And this gives us a good idea of where you all are at right now with this reporting. And so how prepared do you think your team is for correctly completing the LIHEAP quarterly report for Q1 of federal fiscal year 2025? Are you not at all prepared, so you have not even turned your attention to this? Are you a little prepared? You're aware that it's coming, but you really haven't sat down with it yet? You're mostly prepared. You're already planning for this. You're thinking about the data, you're collecting it, and you're working out nuances, or you're very prepared. You're already working on it and you understand it.
All right, let's give the poll another 10 seconds.
All right. So we have people a little bit all over the place. Most of you have prepared somewhat for this, and our hope is that this webinar will move you a step or two closer to being in the next category. Keep in mind, we're going to present a lot of information, and so if you aren't clear on something or you just want some more one-on-one training or technical assistance around a certain area, we are available after this webinar, and you can call us anytime for assistance. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan Bausch, who's going to provide an overview of the quarterly report.
Thanks, Melissa. If you can bring the slides back up, Nicholas, we're going to talk about the quarterly report history, why this report was developed, and why this report is important. So first, on the background for the quarterly report, the Federal LIHEAP Office has collected information on LIHEAP programs historically since the LIHEAP program was first created. Most of those reports have focused on things like how much funding was obligated in the prior year, how many households got a specific benefit type. But there were also reports saying, here's what we're going to do in the upcoming fiscal year. Here's our plan of activity and the program components we're going to offer. But there were not any reports collected that provided information in a more real-time fashion than on an annual basis. So in 2022, in response to the activity that was occurring at that time, especially with the supplemental funds that came as a result of the pandemic, the Federal LIHEAP Office created the LIHEAP Quarterly Report, and that report was approved by the Office of Management and Budget after a public comment period. I really like this visual because it gives you a sense of how this report fits into the overall reporting process. So the model plan, again, is looking forward at what you'll be doing, the different benefit amounts you're going to provide, really valuable information about what your program parameters are. There are a number of reports that look back after a fiscal year has closed out at what occurred during that fiscal year, how the money was used, who benefits went to, etc. But the quarterly report provides more real-time indicators of what's going on mid-year, midstream, so that the Federal LIHEAP Office and the public and stakeholders in the government can help to understand what the program's doing and where there might be different needs arising. Next slide. As I mentioned, the report was created in 2022, so it's a fairly recent report. And HHS required all grant recipients, so state grant recipients, territory grant recipients, as well as tribal grant recipients to submit the report. In 2023, HHS, after receiving some comments on the report, made some changes, including making some items optional if you're a tribal grant recipient awarded less than $50,000 in regular LIHEAP funds for a given federal fiscal year. Some sections of this report were made optional. And then most recently in 2024, the report was put into the online data collection system, OLDC. After initially being completed in a spreadsheet, it was moved into the OLDC platform, where you also submit your model plans, your household report, and your carryover report. So what are the real purposes of this report? There's three main areas that are really critical to understanding LIHEAP at the level of each grant recipient, at regional level, and a national level. One is understanding how many households you're assisting and how you're using your funds. Those are program outcomes, and the report asks about those in the initial first and third section. The report also asks for indicators of the impact that your program is having on households that are facing energy crises or energy emergencies. That's in section 2. We're going to look at the report section by section in a little bit. But these are impacts to really understand how many households facing these kind of serious emergency situations were assisted at during a given 3-month period. And then lastly, the report has a number of questions that it asks, open-ended kinds of questions, yes/no questions about changes you may have made to your program recently, challenges you're encountering, impacts that clients are reporting. That information is really useful to see what is going on the ground, and if there's any innovative changes or practices going on that might be useful for other grant recipients to know about. The information you report in the quarterly reports is used. It is valuable, and we wanted to tell you about a few different ways that it's used and that you can use it yourself for your own purposes. First is that it does allow you to track activity quarter by quarter, and some of you may have processes set up to be doing that or to be tracking things monthly, and some of you may not. It's really valuable now that the quarterly report's been submitted for multiple years. You can see how your activity in Q3 this year compared to Q3 last year, and track, and it also gives you a sense of maybe what to expect in the coming year for a quarter by looking back at last year's quarter. So it gives you that important kind of tracking information. It also demonstrates how the seasonal nature of different LIHEAP components, and for some of you, your programs operate and provide a lot of your assistance and use a lot of your LIHEAP funds during 1 or 2 quarters out of the year, and others of you in a different region of the country, it may be the same thing but during different quarters. So this is really useful to show the full picture of LIHEAP during heating season, cooling season, at the local level and the national level. The report helps the federal LIHEAP office to be able to respond to questions about LIHEAP that come from Congress and the administration, and from the public about LIHEAP and about how public funds are being used. Those reports are really where the federal office is able to go to those reports and look at them. It also helps inform OCS on how to target additional training and technical assistance needs. So if there's a question in there, what kind of challenges are you facing? What can OCS be doing better? And those questions, your responses to those help to inform planning for the coming year, and help to know what kinds of items that OCS can focus on for training webinars and for training communications. And then all the data is directly taken and it's put into the LIHEAP data dashboard, so that it can be seen by the public, it can be used by you as well. And if we go to the next slide, this is a screenshot of what it looks like in the data dashboard. The link is here too. If you download the slides, you can look at any grant recipient and you can look at their information from their past quarterly reports. So the data that you submit, the Federal LIHEAP Office is taking that, putting it into a more user-friendly format that anyone is allowed to be able to go and use. So we just wanted to make sure that you were all aware that this dashboard exists and how important the information you provide is. All right, now we're going to talk about what's new for the quarterly report for the current federal fiscal year 2025. First, we wanted you to know that an action transmittal was published earlier this month that announces the report, the 2025 quarterly report, and it includes the instructions for the report as well as the due date for the report each quarter. So you have to submit 4 iterations of the report in 2025, going over your activity during each 3-quarter period that aligns with the federal fiscal year. The first quarter's report is due at the end of February, February 28th. Just like it was for 2024, the 2025 report is due in the OLDC data system. You have to navigate to the report, then navigate to the right dates for 2025. If you have any challenges or questions with OLDC, we're going to have slides on that in a bit and where to go for help. And the report has to be submitted and validated in OLDC by a designated authorized official. So it's not uploading a spreadsheet or something like that. It's going in and entering the report information in a form and then having a person with the right credentials able to submit that report. Here's the schedule that was published in the action transmittal showing the due dates for each quarter. If you download the slides again from the handouts, you can print that out or save that or post it on your bulletin board so you have it handy. We wanted to talk about changes, and the good news is there's no changes to the quarterly report from last year's 2024 report. The report looks the same. It asks for the same information. You're submitting it in the same format and roughly in the same schedule as for 2024. So there's no big surprises with the report the reports that are coming up. We do want to remind you, even though there haven't been changes, it's really important to refresh yourself as to the instructions for the report. So those are also a handout on this webinar and are included with the action transmittal. It's also important to verify that you can get into the OLDC system and find the report. OLDC sometimes can be a challenge to use, so we just encourage you before that February due date comes up that you go in and make sure you can find it and you're ready to enter the information when you have it. There are resources that have been made available to you to help if this is your first time completing the report, or maybe you're returning to it and you knew there were some issues with the last report that you want to improve upon in 2025. Talked about the action transmittal already. The instructions document goes into more detail along the lines of this webinar, but in a more of a written document format to talk about what exactly each item in the report is requesting. We also have included here a spreadsheet template of what the report looks like, and that can be useful just to share with your staff that might be working on the report or for you to print out so you can have it. And then we also have what's called a check before you submit document. And this has a series of questions to help you make sure your report is ready to be officially submitted in OLDC. So it'll ask you, did you report the households that were served for the 3-month quarter period? Yes or no, and you go through this series of questions, and if you can answer yes to all of them, you're ready to submit. So we encourage you to also download and use that resource. Now we're going to talk about the data that you need to be able to complete this report. And I'll turn it back to Melissa.
Thanks, Dan. So in this section, we're going to go over kind of high level, the kind of data you need to complete the report. And keep in mind, in the next section, we're going to kind of go through each element in more detail. Now, to complete the quarterly report, you're going to need 4 types of data and information. You're going to need information about your assisted household, so who you helped. You're going to need information about those households' energy status, and that's whether or not you were able to use LIHEAP to prevent an energy disconnection or to restore energy after a home energy loss, and we'll talk more about that. Fiscal data on obligations, as well as just information about your program implementation. Now, numbers 2, 3, and 4, the household energy status, the fiscal data, and the program implementation information are all starred because they're optional for tribal grant recipients who are awarded less than $50,000 in funding. So if you have a question about whether that includes you, please reach out to your liaison or to Apprise, and we can talk you through that. That being said, optional doesn't mean you don't necessarily want to do it, right? So please contact us with questions if you decide, no, I'm not required, but I still want to do this. We're happy to help. So the first data element we're going to talk about is the one that's required for everyone, and this is assisted household data. And in order to get this, you're going to need to access your own program records. For some of you, this may be an IT system. Others of you track this on paper. But you need to have an idea of who was given assistance or benefits. And this includes all households assisted with LIHEAP, and that means regular LIHEAP, crisis, weatherization, or equipment services. The time period you need to have this data for is a quarter. So when you are filling out these quarterly reports and this data element specifically, you're looking at a snapshot in time for that 3-month period, so 1 quarter. Now the focus is on households. So some of you give multiple benefits to households. So for example, North Dakota, I'm picking on them a little bit, they give benefits every month. So for them, within a quarter, someone could get 3 benefits. But this report is asking for the number of households, not the number of benefits and not about household members. So this is an example kind of program record. We have ID and name blocked out. You might have the benefit type received. Of course, once again, we're looking across all of LIHEAP, so that's not critical for this particular report. And then the award date, which would of course let you go in and gather everyone who was served in the quarter you're reporting on. The next data element that you would need is household energy status information. And this is going to be on the client application or their intake information, and ideally in your program records, so whatever spreadsheet you're keeping or your IT system. And this is looking at the number of households assisted with LIHEAP, where LIHEAP resulted in either energy service being restored if they were already disconnected or out of fuel, or prevented imminent loss of home energy. So this looks different. We'll talk about this in a second, but the idea here is that people who were perhaps facing a disconnection or are nearly out of fuel. Once again, we're looking at a 3-month quarter here. It's a snapshot in time. And unlike the previous data element, we're not looking at households here. We're looking at occurrences. So in North Dakota, the example that I just gave, where they serve someone every month, a person could potentially have had 3 different occurrences where LIHEAP prevented them from having their energy shut off, or from where it, restored home energy when it was already shut off. And so what we're looking at here is the number of times a LIHEAP benefit restored or prevented home energy loss. And so in the data here, you're going to need one more piece of information, right? You not only need the household, but you're going to need whether or not the benefit resulted in a restoration or prevention. And you all collect this very different ways. So this is just one example of how the data might be collected. I want to note again that for tribal grant recipients who are awarded funding under that $50,000 threshold, they're not required to report this information. Next slide. The third data element you need is fiscal data, and this is related to obligations. And so in order to report this, you're going to need to have some records of how you obligated funds that were awarded by HHS. The data time period is the amount as of the last day of the quarter, but this is once again different than the last two, where the last two we're looking at a snapshot in time, a 1-quarter period. This looks at a cumulative amount through the end of the quarter you're reporting on. So in quarter one, you're going to report all of the funds obligated in quarter one. In quarter two, you're going to report all of the funds obligated in quarter one and two, and so on until you reach the end of the year. And so this is once again an example. It's different because we're not looking at households anymore. We're looking at big pieces of funding here, and you're going to want to understand the award amount, how much was obligated, and the date that it was obligated so that you can track and report for each of these quarters. Next slide. This is program implementation information, and this is more qualitative data, and this is just your own administrative documentation, your own policy records, but this is really about reporting changes and development to the program made since the previous LIHEAP quarterly report. And so OCS uses this information to kind of look at what issues are in the field, where additional training or technical assistance may be needed, to look at promising practices or innovations out there that they can share or study or look at. And so this is super valuable information, real-time information that OCS can use to do a better job of serving you all as grant recipients. Once again, it is optional for tribal grant recipients, but as with all of these data elements, we know that they're useful not just to OCS, but for your own program planning and reporting. And so we encourage you to report whenever possible. Now let's spend some time on each of these because there's a lot of information, and I want to be sure that you all have kind of some of the nuances and also understand some of the challenges that we've seen in these reports so that you can learn from that. Let's start with the very first piece. This is the total households assisted. And if you go to the next slide, what we've broken out for you is we've given you a specific example on where and what you need to report. It asks you to report one data point. All grant recipients must complete this, including tribes who are under that funding threshold. And what you're going to report is a total count of households assisted by LIHEAP during the 3-month quarter you're reporting on. So for that first report that's due in February, you're going to be reporting on just quarter one, how many households were assisted. Next slide. Now keep in mind, these are households that were issued or awarded a benefit during the quarter that was paid with LIHEAP funds. And it includes all LIHEAP, so not just bill payment assistance, but also weatherization or equipment assistance. We're looking at basically any household who got even $1 in LIHEAP funding or services should be counted in this section. So let's look at who's not included. Households served entirely with other funds besides LIHEAP. Oh, if you want to go back a second. Households served entirely with other funds besides federal LIHEAP. So many of you have, say, utility funds or state funds that pay for energy assistance benefits. Unless the household is getting LIHEAP, we're not really interested in that for this report. Households who applied but were denied and did not receive a benefit, those should not be included in this report. Households who applied but were not assisted until after the quarter, those should be counted in the next quarter. Now, this is where things can get a little bit different for every state and tribe and territory. Some of you may count a pledge as being assisted. Some of you may wait to count people until the vendor was paid. Whatever you decide, you need to be consistent from quarter to quarter. So make a decision about when you want to count a household as assisted, and then use that as your marker throughout the year. Households who only received a nominal benefit to assist with SNAP eligibility. So we are excluding HEAT and EAT households here. And if you have questions about that, please reach out. So here's some kind of tips. Some guidance for calculating. We're looking at household, not the number of benefits that were issued or the total household members. And so this means that if a household got more than one benefit during the quarter, you're only going to count them once. We're looking at an unduplicated count of households for this quarter. Do you count a household in the report if they were counted in a prior quarter? Once again, this is a snapshot in time. So even if they were served in the prior quarter, if they were served again in the quarter you're reporting on, you should be reporting them in this quarter. So we're looking at an unduplicated count within the quarter you're reporting on. The intention of this report is to include all assisted households in the quarter, and this includes things like LIHEAP weatherization and equipment. Now, some of you actually work with partners to do this piece of LIHEAP, and if so, that means that you should be negotiating some kind of data exchange quarterly so that you can get the information from them necessary to provide a count in this report of all LIHEAP households. Once again, this is something Apprise can help you with if you don't already have this established. The second section focuses on performance management, which is a fancy way of saying that we're looking at those households where a LIHEAP benefit either restored service that was gone or it prevented imminent loss of home energy. And so let's talk about this. Once again, this is optional for tribal grant recipients, but what we're looking at is the total number of times during that quarter that a LIHEAP benefit or LIHEAP assistance prevented the imminent loss of home energy service, or the total number of times during the 3-month quarter that a LIHEAP benefit or LIHEAP assistance restored home energy to a household that didn't have energy service. We'll talk about what each of those means, but I think the important takeaway here is that we're looking at occurrences. So if you served a household more than once in a quarter and that prevented loss of home energy or restored home energy more than once, you're going to report all the times. So this is a case where we're counting numbers and not unduplicated counts. So you can go to the next slide. This should include all instances where a benefit during the quarter that was paid in full or in part with LIHEAP federal funds prevented the imminent loss of home energy service. So this is going to be line 1. Instances where no federal LIHEAP funds were used, once again, should not be here. And we're also not counting instances where LIHEAP assisted households, but they weren't facing an imminent loss of home energy. Now, some of you are saying what's imminent. I'll talk about that here in a second. If you want to go to the next slide. Examples of prevention, and this is where we get that what is imminent, what does this even mean? It's up to you to define what a prevention is and what imminent loss looks like. But here are some examples. A household with a disconnection or a shutoff notice who received a LIHEAP benefit that applied to that account, preventing their service from being disconnected. Households who are low on delivered fuel, who received a LIHEAP fuel payment or fuel delivery, and households who had working but maybe failing equipment that was repaired or replaced with LIHEAP federal funds. Next slide. So the counting unit are instances. This is a really handy slide, and we've obviously put one in here for each of these data points because it is giving you guidance on calculation. So whereas the last one said the counting unit was a household, this one is saying we're counting occurrences or instances of prevention. And it's clarifying that if a household was assisted multiple times or there were multiple instances of prevention, you're going to count all of those. What constitute an imminent loss of home energy service? Each grant recipient determines what is imminent. And we do have a supplement that gives a lot of examples, but for those of you who may be new to this, especially our tribal members out there, what happens is that most of the time you have something on your application that says, are you already disconnected? Or you ask during the intake. Or are you low on fuel? Do you have less than 25% of a tank? Is your furnace, kicking up dust? Whatever the question might be. And those are generally the indicators or the fields you would use to say, okay, if they already have a disconnection notice, then this LIHEAP benefit is a prevention, right? It's preventing them from being fully disconnected. Now, for some of you, you offer a specific crisis program. And it is, I think, instinctual to say, okay, we're just going to count anyone who's under crisis as a prevention or a restoration. But some of you actually use your regular payments to prevent a disconnection. It doesn't always have to be a crisis payment. So you need to look at your program design and figure out the best way to identify whether a household is facing home energy loss, not just assuming it's just going to be crisis households, because for many of you, some of the regular households are also going to be in this situation. Next slide, please. Restoration of service. This is all instances where a benefit that was paid or in full or in part with federal LIHEAP funds restored home energy to a household that had lost services. Once again, it shouldn't include payments where no LIHEAP funds were used, or households that still had their home energy when you served them. Let's talk about what it does, a little bit more about what it does include. Examples might be households who are already shut off, so they've already gotten a disconnection and a LIHEAP benefit restored their service. A household who has no delivered fuel, they're completely out, and where a LIHEAP resulted in a fuel delivery. And then households with non-working equipment, so broken furnaces, red tagged equipment counts here, and LIHEAP repaired or replaced it. All of these are examples of restoration. Now, just like you can go to the next slide, just like the previous, it is up to you to define this. And we have a supplement for that as well. And all these are linked here, but you can go and find out how to better define this and include it on your application or in your intake process so that you can actually track these households and these occurrences. Once again, you're counting instances, not households. So what you're looking at is the number of times LIHEAP restored home energy. And if a household was assisted multiple times, you're going to count all of them. Most programs will automatically provide crisis assistance for households who have lost service. But once again, a regular benefit can sometimes be what actually restores home energy for a household. And so pay attention to your program and take a look at it and use your policies and procedures to determine the best way to identify whether a household's benefit is restoring service. Estimated use of LIHEAP funds. So this is where we're talking about obligations. As many of you know, obligations are not necessarily expenditures, and we'll hit on that a couple of times here. But the whole point of this is that in the middle of the year, OCS is often asked how much of the annual funding has gone out or has been obligated. And this report gives them the ability to at least give Congress or the administration or stakeholders a better answer. This section is optional, once again, for tribal grant recipients who don't meet that funding threshold. And what you're going to report is the cumulative amount of your FY25 funds that have been obligated as of the end of the quarter. So whereas the previous two sections look at a snapshot a quarter at a time, this is looking at a cumulative amount. How much so far for this year have you obligated? And so you'll notice that we have marked here that column B is not applicable for quarter one. You're going to focus on column A. Next slide. So there has been a lot more training and a lot more guidance from OCS on obligations. Encourage you all to take a look at this. We've included a link at the bottom of this slide. And the reason this is important is that obligation is a different definition for all of you. It's up to you to define what an obligation is. But what's the important takeaway today is that obligations are not always the same as expenditures. So some of you may obligate funds by sending out contracts to your sub-grant recipients. Some of you may make pledges to households, but not pay the vendor for, 90 or more days. Some of you may encumber funds in contracts or procurement processes, but not actually spend the money until later. And so obligations can cover a wide range of uses that aren't necessarily expenditures. And so it's very important before you really sit down and think about this reporting that you understand clearly how your state or tribe or territory defines obligations. Next slide, please. So what this is looking for are your obligations of FY25 funds, and this includes regular LIHEAP funds as well as any other LIHEAP funds and supplemental infrastructure and IIJA funds. And you're reporting the cumulative amount, the total obligated in the whole fiscal year as of the end of the quarter. And so we've made this crystal clear for quarter 2, 3, and 4. This means you're not just reporting funds obligated in the 3-month quarter, you're reporting the total amount to date, which includes amounts obligated during the prior quarters. So it shouldn't include any non-federal funds. It shouldn't include any prior funds that were obligated that you carried into FY25. And it shouldn't just look straight at expenditures for the reasons we just talked about. Obligations are not always expenditures. Next slide. We've given an example here. So let's pretend that in FY25, you're awarded $5 million by HHS for LIHEAP. In quarter 1, you obligated 3 million of these funds. Let's say you sent them all out in agreements to your subgrant recipients. In quarter 2, you obligated an additional $1 million of these funds. In quarter 3, you obligated no additional funds, and in quarter 4, you obligated 800,000 of the remaining 1 million, and you decide you're going to carry over 200,000 for obligation later. So if you look at this, what you're seeing is that in quarter 1, when you obligated $3 million, you're going to report $3 million. But in quarter 2, you're not just going to talk about the 1 million you obligated in quarter 2, you're going to talk about both the 3 plus the 1 million. So it's cumulative, $4 million. In quarter 3, the same thing. And in quarter 4, you're only going to report the 8. For quarter 4, you're only going to include the 800,000 that you obligated. You're not going to include that 200,000 that you're carrying forward of unobligated funds. But in each quarter, you're adding up the dollars from the previous and the current to get a cumulative amount. And I know that I'm drumming this home a lot, but this is probably one of the #1 issues we're still seeing in reports is that people are confused about this quarter versus cumulative amount. And so we want to make it very clear. And the last reporting section is this program implementation and support. And this is a qualitative information we just talked about. If you want to go to the next slide, this is really, really valuable information for OCS, and it asks you to answer questions and provide descriptive responses. And what you'll notice is that for each quarter, the number or the questions change a little bit. So quarters 1 to 3 are going to ask you what kind of changes you've made in different areas. And then quarter 4 is going to ask you more about the results of those changes that you've seen over the year. And they're going to ask about things like, have you changed your income eligibility, your outreach strategies, your benefit matrix, or other LIHEAP policies? And they're looking for you to talk about the things that you're observing, changing, and that may be trends across the United States so that they can provide training and technical assistance that will help all grant recipients, or once again, identify promising or unique practices that they can share with people who might be struggling with something or are looking for new ideas. Next slide. So some questions require a yes or no response, and if you do answer yes to any of the questions, you'll need to provide a brief explanation of what, when, and why changes were made in the response space. But other questions just ask for a narrative response, and so we would just ask you to provide a response wherever you can, and to if it's not applicable at all, or there really is no change, to just put an NA. Now, I do want to note that one thing we've seen is that a person may enter a change, say in Q2, and they are just leaving that for the rest of the year. So not going back in and changing that narrative response. So pay attention to this, even if you have no updates, go in and change your response for the quarter. Otherwise, we think you missed it, or you're just not paying attention. So keep that in mind. This information, once again, is used by OCS to identify training and technical assistance, and it's also considered when we look at the dashboard and what that should contain. And finally, at the very end, are remarks. Now, this is similar to the notes section and any of the other OCS reports, LIHEAP reports. This is an area where you can go in and clarify any kind of issues. You can go to the next slide. Any kind of issues with the data, anything that might make the data not reliable. If there's something that you missed or isn't present in the data, and you're going to come back and edit it, this is where you'd want to note that. Anything you think that the OCS or the people reviewing the report should know needs to go into this remarks box, and you really can't have too much here. This is useful for you to provide context for your own state, tribe, or territory staff, your own auditors, as well as OCS and Apprise. And so now I'm going to turn it back over to Dan to give us some final reminders about the LIHEAP Quarterly Report.
Thanks, Melissa. All right, so we want to kind of zoom back out and look at some of the main takeaways from the webinar today. So the first is the quarterly reports are continuing for this current federal fiscal year 2025. The report gets submitted in OLDC, and there are going to be 4 submissions. The first one is due at the end of February. If you need any help with the report, you're struggling with some aspect of the report, we want to hear from you and be able to know how we can assist you. So you can reach out to us or your program specialists, and we encourage you to do that earlier rather than later. And if you see that due date approaching for February and something's come up that's going to make it difficult for you to be able to submit the report, you need to reach out to your assigned program specialist to talk about the challenges and request an extension. Next slide. So there's no changes to the report from last year's report, so the same procedures can be used. But one thing I wanted to encourage you to do was you have been contacted by Apprise for 2024 for your quarterly reports. We always encourage you to look back at the emails that you received about your most recent submitted quarterly report, so you can see what kinds of questions we asked you to confirm information, or what kinds of things we noted for you, so that you're able to be aware of those as you're completing the new report. And maybe if you double check that an issue isn't re-emerging that you fixed from the past quarter. So Melissa talked about obligations being cumulative. Just looking back at those past emails kind of are a good reminder for making sure that you're following the instructions and addressing any issues. And the form has the same layout as last time. OLDC does have a help desk run by the Grant Solutions team that runs OLDC. The phone numbers on the bottom of this slide and their email. They can help if you're locked out or you're having trouble seeing the report or getting there. So we encourage you to reach out to them if you're facing kind of a login issue. There is a process to officially submit the report in OLDC. After you log in, you have to navigate to the report. And if you have downloaded today's slides, there's a few slides about how to do that. Once you've entered your information and you're ready, you need to save the report. Then you need to go and validate the report. That's a step where OLDC checks that information is complete. Then you have to, the right official has to change the report to a certify status. And once you're ready, and you've reached that point, you then can take the step to submit the report. All right, so what happens when you submit the report? Well, OCS and Apprise are going to review the report after you've submitted it. And we just want to reiterate to you that the point of that review is to be able to assist you. I talked at the beginning of the webinar about how this information is valuable and used and how it's made publicly available. So we want to make sure that your report is correct and accurate. There's no accidental data entry issues or anything like that. So we're reviewing the report just to help you make sure the report is complete and consistent, and to convey, we're hoping we're conveying to you how valuable the information is. After we review the report, if we find that there are questions that we have for you, or we see something that we think might be an issue, we're going to reach out to you by email to ask you about it. And we try to lay out in the email what the specific question is and where in the report we're referring to. We may review your report and find no issues, and we'll still email you and tell you that your report is considered complete. When we email you, you'll hear from someone from Apprise, but your program specialist will be copied, as well as anyone else you would like included. We ask that you please try to respond in a timely manner so we can get the review process complete and are able to provide the information for the data dashboard in a timely fashion. I forgot to mention, if you do need to make corrections to the report, you're able to do that in OLDC, and we always re-review the report just to make sure no new issues have come up in that process. There's a lot of helpful links here to some of the resources that are also in the attachments, but I also wanted you to be aware of the required reports page on the LIHEAP Performance Management website. That's on the bottom of this slide. On that page has a little section on each of the reports the Federal LIHEAP Office asks grant recipients to submit. So we encourage you, if you're wondering, well, where do I find the instructions for this report? Where are the past training webinars on the report? This page is a great resource to go to. All right, well, we're about to take any of your questions, but we wanted to start with a poll. How helpful was this webinar in understanding what's needed to complete the LIHEAP Quarterly Report for Federal Fiscal Year 2025? Not at all helpful, not too helpful, somewhat helpful, or very helpful. So if you could take some time to please answer the poll, that helps us to know how we're doing and to help us plan for future webinars. And we'll give everyone maybe 10 more seconds. All right, Nicholas, are we ready? Okay, looks like it was helpful, and we're hoping to make our future webinars all very helpful for everyone. So if you have feedback on how we can make them more helpful, send us an email. That would be really valuable for us. All right, we're going to turn to questions that have been submitted. Nicholas, do we have any questions?
Yes. So our first question is about obligations. if in the quarter we didn't obligate any funds, or we actually had some funds come back to us, what should we be reporting in section 3?
That's a great question. So as Melissa emphasized, each time you're submitting the report for each quarter, you're reporting the cumulative obligations that have taken place during that federal fiscal year. So there are going to be circumstances where maybe you obligated 95% of your funds by the end of the second quarter, and you're saving the other 5% of your funds to carry it for carryover to the subsequent fiscal year. In that case, you still, for the quarter 3 report and then for the quarter 4 report, you're still going to put that same number that you put on the quarter 2 report. So you should never have a 0 in the obligation amount in these reports unless for the first quarter you didn't obligate anything and you saved it for later quarters. So if you've obligated everything or most of your funds, a later quarter you're not obligating anymore, you'll still put the total number you obligated and had on your earlier report. There are also cases now, if you recently submitted the quarter 4 report, there are going to be cases where maybe you believed you'd obligated a certain amount by the end of the third quarter, and then you had some funds returned to you, or maybe you have a partner that you give funds to for weatherization, for example. They weren't able to use as much as anticipated, and they return it back to you. So your obligation amount could go down a little bit for those reasons in the fourth quarter report. And we may ask you in an email, we would notice, and we would say, well, we noticed your obligation amount went down. Can you please confirm if that's correct and due to a new estimate or due to new returned funds? And we just need you to put a note in the report if that's the case, or provide an explanation to us. So the key is just explaining and making sure you're reporting cumulatively and with the most accurate information you have as of the end of each quarter.
Next question, where it asks for the assistance date, exactly what date is that? I'm weatherization. Is it the final audit date, the date billing submitted, etc.?
So I'll take this one, Dan. That is something, if you need to work out with your LIHEAP office, which date they want you to use. So for example, I know one state that does it uses the final audit date. I know another uses the date that they pay vendors, you know what I mean? Like, for example, if it was an HVAC work, you know, whatever it might be, you need to just work out which date and then use that date all year. So that might vary. And if you need help, give us a call, but pick one that you would use that makes the most sense to you, and maybe recommend it to your LIHEAP office and make sure that that's fine with them. And when I say LIHEAP, I mean the energy assistance person. Dan, would you share? Go ahead.
No,
Go ahead.
I agree. There's lots of different dates that you might be recording in your system for different things, and you just need to identify which date best meets your needs and represents when the household received the assistance. And as long as you're counting in the same way across the quarters, it's fine.
And if we have time for one more quick question, if there's a program question in the report that doesn't apply to me, what kind of response should I provide? Should I leave it blank or put not applicable?
It's best if you feel like a question doesn't apply in those open-end questions to put not applicable, or a short response like that. We don't provide this kind of assistance. Our program was closed by quarter 4. Just a short response like that is very helpful.
It shows us that you didn't just miss the question or skip it.
Right.
Maybe that's a better way to say it.
Right.
Nicholas, you mentioned that someone had asked us to go back to a slide. I don't know if we have time for that, but whoever it was, I can reach out to them individually. So you can just share that with me.
Okay.
Do.
All right, well, if you submitted a question and we didn't get to it, we will be following up. If you have other questions that come up later, definitely reach out to us by email, but we hope the training has been useful, and we look forward to communicating with you about the reports in the coming year. Thank you for your time today, and we wish you all a happy holiday season.
Yeah, happy holidays.